The Switch 2 has a few new RPGs to play and many more on the way, but in the meantime, what's great is the ability to play Switch 1 RPGs and other games through backwards compatibility. While some games have slight improvements like faster load times and more consistent frame rates, some could honestly benefit way more from the power of the Switch 2 if they had a Switch 2 version. So let's get into my first pick that I think needs a Switch 2 upgrade. Atelier Yumia is a wonderful RPG with endearing characters, a great story, and a pretty solid battle system. What isn't solid is the frame rate and the graphical quality. While the game does provide a performance mode and a quality mode, which prioritize frame rate and graphical fidelity respectively, the difference between the two is negligible. The game targets 30 frames per second, but falls short at times regardless of which mode the game is in. And as for the graphics, they could stand to be improved. The textures and character models look a bit rough even in quality mode. And with the Switch 2's power, I'm sure they could target 60 or up to 60 frames along with some improved resolutions. 4K would be nice, but I feel like it would end up being 1440p on the high end or 1080p on the low end. While it's still a pretty good game on Switch 1, having a Switch 2 version would truly take this game to the next level. I have a strong bias for this next one because it's my favorite RPG of all time, but I would love to see a Switch 2 version of Xenoblade Chronicles X. On Switch 1, the game runs very well at 1080p docked and 720p handheld, with a solid and consistent 30 frames per second across the board. On Switch 2, the game loads a lot faster, which is nice, but if it had 4K and 60 frames per second, I would definitely be okay with that. And apparently, deep within the code of the game, there's an uncompleted 60 FPS mode, so Nintendo's definitely been playing around with the idea of improving the game's performance. As for something else they could add to the Switch 2 version, maybe new skills, a more robust version of the online. Overall, Xenoblade Chronicles X could become an even better experience if there was a Switch 2 version. Another game that could really benefit from what Switch 2 can offer is Astral Chain. The game came out in 2019 and was developed by Platinum Games, and Astral Chain runs pretty well at 30 frames per second with a few dips here and there with dynamic resolution to help keep that frame rate as consistent as possible. What would be nice to see from a Switch 2 version of the game would be a higher and preferably locked resolution with 60 frames per second. The game could also include new content for the story to make it more appealing to anyone who played the game or anyone new. But with Platinum Games' current situation, the likelihood of a Switch 2 version happening anytime soon, or at all, is not too promising. NieR Automata, one of the games that I, along with many others, hope to see land on the Nintendo Switch. And after it did, I was happy to see how nice the visuals and frame rate were. It had dynamic resolution just like Astral Chain and was 1080p docked for the most part and 720p when played in handheld, with both modes holding a solid 30 frames per second. With a Switch 2 version, I feel it could reach 60 frames per second and 4K with DLSS. As for other additions to the game, I personally feel like the graphical and performance improvements would be good enough. If you disagree though, let me know in the comments what features you'd add to the Switch 2 version of NieR. Warframe absolutely needs a Switch 2 version. The game is well supported by its developer, Digital Extremes, and the only major drawback of this MMORPG is how it performs at times. Having spent many hours playing this game since its launch on the Switch, I've definitely come across a fair share of issues with the game, like crashes, frame rate drops, and of course, less than stellar resolution, which you don't need hours of playing the game to notice. While the game is immensely fun and still functions well enough to sink hours of time into, it would certainly do well with a Switch 2 version. An improved resolution, maybe to 1440p, and an FPS locked at 60 would be a massive enhancement to the game and could make the hours of grinding for goodies to build your next piece of equipment that much more enjoyable. What I'd also like to add in is, if you thought of any RPGs on the Switch that should get a Switch 2 version, drop them in the comments. I'm DJ Raviesta. That's gonna be it for me. The Rhinos are watching. Good night.